All right, we are live. Welcome, everyone. This is Kaylee Filio. I'm sales and marketing with PartsEdge. We also have Blake Featherly with us. He's one of our parts inventory experts. So he's going to be presenting today. We've been getting a lot of requests on tariffs. I think everyone's talking about it. So here we are, finally addressing it and giving it more of that parts perspective and what we need to consider. So Blake, take it away.
Thanks, Kaylee. Yeah, we kind of had to shift stuff around. We had another topic we were thinking about, and as Kaylee said, us on the parts side here, Chuck and I work directly under Chuck on the parts team, and we're just getting a lot more of those calls, as everybody can imagine, with everything going on in our economic climate, as we'll say. We're just starting to field more and more calls, so we just felt it relevant. This might be, semi-brief, not as long as some of our other topics, but definitely something worth covering just with everything going on. And it really plays into kind of our nature here at PartsEdge. We like to cover things and be prepared and really, obviously keep a pulse on the industry and really take this information and kind of help shift it to where we don't want be reactive. We want to be proactive. And some of this today, we won't get too terribly in the weeds with things, but we want to help more or less with this conversation, give our perspective on it, and of course help feed into it so that way we can kind of, as you'll see, somewhat shift that narrative and help prepare you guys, all of our fellow people here in the industry, whether you're a client with us or you're just a part of the industry, and we want to help you with this to be proactive with it, not necessarily, as you can see, reactive. And really why we're all here. Some of us, we're waking up every day, we're reading news articles. Chuck, is obviously stays very involved. All of us are kind of watching it, but some of us, are we getting a little tired of hearing this rhetoric over and over and going on with tariffs? But we see what's going on in our economy and what effect it's going to have. And obviously this one, it's going to directly affect all of us, or it could. And that's what's going on. And that's why, of course, we wanted to discuss it and kind of, give rationale as to what it could affect and why. But as you'll see, that's what we want to do with this conversation is really try to get a good fundamental foothold as to what is going on with it. And as you can see, the broad conversation, everything that's been portrayed in the media, 25% increase, directly affecting us. But what are the realities of it? And not really meant on this to really get in the weeds. It kind of seems to change every day, especially with us, in the automotive industry. Things are varying, we're getting exceptions, it has to do with new vehicle sales. It has to do with us in parts. Even news this morning, affecting, largely our European dealers, so it's just an ever changing dynamic. And without even getting political, it's kind of, yes, this is the surface level real world things that are going to affect us, but then seeing, maybe reading between the lines a little bit of what's going on with the tariffs or why they're wanting to negotiate and, of course, get people to the table. So it's kind of navigating that. And on our end, obviously doing what we do, and all of you, we want to stay in the weeds of that and really help kind of navigate that as to, okay, what are the real world effects going to be? What's actually going to happen? Not get caught up in the fervor of it and really kind of see how it could actually affect us. So that's kind of the true point today. It's not to sit here and have a lecture on what tariffs are, not have a true economic discussion about the implicit impacts of tariffs or why. We want to help redirect the narrative as we see it from our side. And not getting caught up in it, like the nightly news, we're not here to be dramatic. We're not here to, incite that fervor. We want to help channel it appropriately and really how could it affect us, specifically those of us on the parts side of things. And really, the first and foremost, our stance is to get the fundamental understanding that this is not a shortage. This is a genuine cost increase, or what could happen is going to lead to a cost increase. And it's one of those, we kind of have control over that reaction. We've been here a little bit before, especially over the last 5 years. All of us in one way or another have been affected by it, not just the parts industry. with the pandemic, with things like strikes, things that actually genuinely led to shortages that had those economic impacts. But in this case, and this is given the decisions of other countries, we can't control that, whether they outright cut things off. But in the broad scope of this and the genuine thing of tariffs, it's a cost increase. And so to not necessarily get caught up in that, and to look at it from an economic standpoint with a cost increase, because economics in general, they're just as much psychological as they are monetary. So to bring the narrative back in, we can all control our reaction to that. And like this, you're joining us today to get kind of another perspective on it and get a good fundamental understanding of how to appropriately react to it. Because we're going to get questions from you as clients. You're going to get questions from the broader range too, service advisors, retail customers, wholesale shops. You're going to get the broad view of the customer sentiment. You're going to get, conversations happening. You may even get the customers coming in, they might judge the cost of something. And, they're going to say something in regards to tariffs, having an increase of that. It always kind of all of us get a renewed focus on pricing because of things like tariffs. Obviously, nationwide, it's commanding the airwaves. But the point here is to not get caught up in that and kind of, as it states there without reading the slide, regain control. You as the parts experts, the managers of your department with other employees, your counter people, the service advisors and customers alike, not get drawn into the emotion of it, but make some accurate discernments of what's happening and then make decisions from there. Because what does it lead to? If we genuinely take the perspective, okay, it is a cost increase, this is how it's going to affect us. This is how it's going to affect you. It's really the squeeze on those margins. As your cost goes up, that's going to start creeping in. And right now we've done our viable research on our side. We have our sampling of clients. We've kind of looked across the board and even just pulling from that sampling right now, our Chrysler clients, as you can see, it's basically across the board 3% increase. And so in terms of immediate impact, that marginal appreciation, we're not seeing it yet. And it's kind of one, are we going to see it? But we are watching it closely, but there's not that fervor with it. It's not a shortage. We got to look at it from that perspective that it is a cost increase. So how do we control that? And really, because it is an increase in cost, that's where we got to shift that perspective. If you're getting the strategy internally that you want to go out and bolster your inventory because you think it's going to lead to a shortage, that's something to, you guys can control that at your level in terms of individual strategy within your departments. We're not necessarily buying into that because we don't believe it's a genuine shortage. Yes, the cost is going to go up, but your cost of your current inventory is also going to appreciate in the same step. So it's one of those, are we going to aid in the shortage by running out and bolstering inventory? Now, if we want to get emotional about it and respond and react, and that's okay. You got to do what's right for your dealership. But as we see it, we want to make sure we mitigate the actual true realities of a tariff, which has to do with pricing. And how do we control that? On your end, how do you navigate that? We want to get back to the matrix and the true way to, as you can see on here, control costs and really reviewing your matrix. What does it mean with this cost increase coming at us? And we'll kind of see on some slides going forward, but really with a matrix, what does it mean? This is kind of a broad example. Most everybody here likely knows what a matrix is and how it impacts your department. But mainly it's one of those to make sure that it is tiered correctly for what is happening. And even the end there, the last third one, that's kind of where we generally see the most impact with that as well, is making sure your menu and family priced items are really evolving in step with this. And this overall, the tariff does play into a conversation we have pretty frequently, but right now, as we can imagine, and why we wanted to have this conversation is the fact that it's coming at us in real time. And so it does help, start this review of looking at your matrix and how it is a strategic lever with you still being profitable in a time like this or at any point going forward, when we're faced with this situation. And kind of a broad overview, this is an escalator. This is looking at things from list, very commonly, obviously, to do it from cost as well. But really, no matter how your dealership is configured, those of you on here that are clients, this is what we help with. This is what we do. This is what we go in and configure for you within the DMS. But really, this one is kind of a good first step. We just honestly pulled it out as an example to give you an idea of what could be considered if you don't have a matrix set up currently. So broad strokes, but if you want to question that further or want our insight, we could, of course, answer that more offline. I didn't want to get too far in the weeds of that, and I'll actually bring up some resources at the end to help you with that if you want more insight with a matrix specifically, but they vary depending on if you're going from list or cost. And really, the point of this webinar and with tariffs and things going on is genuinely, when was the last time that you did update it? And even consider start having multiple matrices. I mean, even just yesterday, Chuck's on a call and it's one of those, why not implement different matrices for different items? Get dynamic with it. Why do we often confine ourselves with pricing and we just kind of let it be? Now, is it one of those things, does it require a lot of effort, extra hours, if you don't have us in your back pocket? It's one of those, yeah, it's a task for the manager to go in and review it. It is kind of a laborious thing. But tariffs or other economic uncertainty, kind of brings it back into the limelight and of course, refocuses us all on the issue of pricing. In a few other ways that we want to highlight that and I call it margin creep. We kind of put it on here, eroding margin. How does this kind of get away from us over time? Because you all know this. You're busy. It's day to day. You wear, 40 different fire hats. You're managing your department. You're checking in parts, selling parts, managing customers, employees, all that. Things get away from us. And pricing is one of those things. Hey, it's set up. I got it working. It's going. And if you don't have us in your back pocket, if it comes to a point like this where I want to review it or potentially change it, depending on your DMS, that can be quite the daunting task. But an economic situation like this really throws it into the forefront that it needs to be reviewed. And so kind of like the second one, really protecting consistency amongst the group and things like menu and family pricing, things that make it easier for your department and other departments to operate. Those are the key points that we really want to bring up that get reviewed, because it does slip our mind. Hey, I set that cabin filter to $29.95, but now that the cost has crept up, especially over the last few years, and now we're in certain terms, looking at that becoming real world, but there's negotiation happens. This conversation seems to be changing day by day with what the tariffs are actually going to mean or how it's going to actually shake out. But it comes back to this conversation of pricing should be more reviewed on a consistent basis. We should go back to it as departments more often. And we really bring it up, those of you and their clients on here, we want to analyze, customer pay, really get an understanding of margin and ensure that we're not, letting it get away from us. Kind of there, erosion is a good term, having it fall out from under us where, you just come back to it 6 months to a year later and, hey, why is my margin shrunk? None of us want that. And us as a client consulting firm, from PartsEdge, this really plays into us what we do, but it's always worth mentioning. Because really at our heart is inventory optimization. Those of you that are familiar with what we do, really optimizing a DMS to make it as efficient as possible. And that's why we felt the need to have this conversation. Because like this, it's not a shortage issue, with the tariffs. It comes down to the cost issue, which then plays into an efficiency issue within the DMS. Our kind of rule of thumb, as it says there, 20% of your inventory is doing 80% of the profit. Your fast moving items, those maintenance items, again, those family priced items, they're doing a lot of that work per se. And so it's one, if you've established those things in place, like family or menu pricing, you need to go and address that. But also, as this points out, making really educated stocking decisions, not based on that emotional response or fear. It's not a shortage, so we don't want to necessarily react in that way. We've had clients both directions. We've talked through it. Some have decided, hey, I need to go to a little deep. Their executive team wants to feel a little more comfortable. So instead of having a 30, 45 day supply on hand, okay, instead of, wanting to go like a 90-day supply, we talk them back down to a 60-day supply. Or even had some clients that, they do it anyways. They want to go as deep, they're willing to spend the money to invest in that. And hey, that's your decision. We're just here to share some perspective and kind of land back in the middle in terms of, being rational. But the strategy is up to you, because it's kind of one with the increases going on, and I'll shift ahead. This kind of gets to that point with the middle there. If you're investing in it, the cost increase there, your holding costs are obviously going to go up at the same time. So when it comes to considering making that sort of investment to take some breadth or even some depth to those fast moving parts or whatever you decide to invest money in, and put on your shelf, that is another angle to consider when thinking about that level of investment, that, in step, those holding costs are going to go up as well. So you may be thinking you want to get in front of it. Hey, I don't want to run out of these parts or have everybody else react. So I'm going to, buy some of these things. But if we don't get caught up, we just kind of react, address our pricing issues, looking at day supply, making very conscientious decisions, and then to this point, optimizing the inventory as a whole, going back to, okay, making sure I don't order things in that are going to lead to obsolescence, don't make a problem for yourself, down the road. So no matter the strategy you as a dealership are going to take on how you approach this, just consider all these facets. And to optimize our inventory in general, getting rid of some of that aged stuff if you choose to invest, and then of course getting rid of those items is going to actually obviously free up physical space within your dealership. That way, if you do decide to take on some more depth with those high moving items, you can of course free that up as well. So key takeaways from today, the landscape with tariffs is ever changing. The conversations change daily. That political and economic landscape is just going to continually evolve. But we appreciate you joining us today to kind of hopefully get another fundamental perspective on how to approach this, to not get caught up in it, really sit back. And our perspective is, okay, let's just prepare for the cost increases. Are they going to be passed along to the customer? Are they going to be, absorbed a bit by the dealership? However you approach it, genuinely take these tools away that start with pricing, making sure that's dialed in, making sure you're on top of it as a department head, making sure that you're, of course, not going to get blindsided by it. And then the core of it is inventory efficiency is always a key profitability lever. If you're not in such a good situation now, it's one of those to key into those metrics to try to minimize that as time goes on. And a few notes there as we close out, the consideration of the temporary tariff credits. Try to get a broad understanding of what's going on and truly how this is going to impact us. And the final piece there is smart management practices within your department, ultimately going to protect margin, which is what we're all after, and then mitigate the impact to the customer, your end customer. And I'll kind of leave with that. I mean, one of our mottos here, our main motto is, inventory management is not a perfect science. It's really about maximizing the good and minimizing the bad. And so this situation plays into that truly. So we appreciate you joining us here. We were going to keep it brief. We wanted to just cover this kind of as a broad conversation and redirect that narrative to not have an emotional response, but have a candid review of your current pricing structure. Here in a couple slides, I'm going to give you some resources if you do want to dive in further and get a more in the weeds look at how to configure pricing. Different examples will definitely give you some resources. Mr. Hartley here has covered that topic in length, so we'll definitely make that available. But right now, we'll just kind of open the floor. If we have any specific questions, we'll take that on now.
One of the things I want to add, Blake, great job.
Thanks, Joe.
That if there's one report all of you should start looking at, and it should become the most important report that you look at on a monthly basis, will be your appreciation depreciation report. This is at the beginning of the month when you get that to review the increases. And as Blake mentioned, we did see that Chrysler went in and raised their prices 3%. I think that was a little premature, quite honestly. And remember, the manufacturers, this is a good excuse for them to raise the prices, whether some of these parts are being tariffed or not. As Blake gave a couple of good examples, I was actually on the phone with some JLR dealerships, and we got two completely different perspectives where one dealer was ready to go to a 6-month supply on their maintenance items. And after looking at that, it was for a very round number, about $100,000 increase to get up to a 6-month supply on their fast-moving maintenance items. And after talking with the dealer, he kept thinking there was going to be this severe shortage out of the UK. And I told him, I said, be patient. And this was 3 weeks ago. We had that conversation. I talked him down from doing it. And I explained to him, and if you think about this, and, Blake had that slide on the holding costs, because I said, okay, you buy an extra $100,000. The good news is if it does increase 10%, and that's probably pretty high, but 10%, now your appreciation is $10,000 on that 100,000. Then taking the holding cost and weighing it for 6-month supply and holding costs being around 2%, basically you just wrote a check up front and you broke even. Looks really good when you get the appreciation, but based on holding costs and the longer parts on the shelf, the less profit, even though it may say 40, the holding cost has brought it down to 30. When you look at that, I can only emphasize one thing here to you folks, and that's at this particular point, it seems to be more harem-scarum. Just today, Donald Trump, in fact, it was yesterday, but it was announced today, Donald Trump and his administration came to terms with the UK, which would have affected the JLR stores, and a much more reasonable tariff at about 5%. And we've even seen some of the tariffs have actually bypassed some of the commodities like auto parts, worrying about that approach. But, so the number one thing, if you take anything away from today, number one, watch your appreciation, depreciation to see what's going up. The second most important thing is if you do a lot of menu pricing. And this, we saw this happen through COVID, folks, is all of a sudden the cost of goods go up, but that fixed menu prices stayed the same. As Blake mentioned, $29.95 for an air filter, and you put that price in 4 years ago at $29.95, and yet now you've seen those air filters have increased by 10 or 12%, but you're still selling them at $29.95. That's where we see the biggest effect on parts gross profit is in those fixed price items not getting adjusted as the price cost increases, that you're increasing the sale price accordingly to maintain your gross. That's probably the most important thing I can add, Blake. And with that, I'll throw it back, and hopefully some of you got some questions. We'd love to hear some questions. There are no dumb questions, guys, and over there in the chat, please chime in. We'd love to hear your comments, anything maybe you've seen real life or something that we can help you with. Back to you, Blake.
Also, too, we've never tried this before, but I think they have the ability to go off mute and ask questions and kind of have a conversation that way. So if that's easier, you can go off mute and ask a question, raise your hand. Sometimes that's easier.
You bet. No, good points, Chuck. I mean, especially, the last 2-3 weeks particularly, I mean, living in appreciation, depreciation on our side, kind of looking at that. And right now it's just kind of the name of the game, but yeah, getting very comfortable with that and just reviewing it, not being so emotionally reactive to what's coming at us. Because even on our side, like we're saying, even with bumping up the cost of something, all of us are kind of emotional that, what it costs for the service advisors, you get feedback there, wholesale guys, that sort of thing. But kind of with the pandemic, everybody understood, all right, this is what it costs, and you kind of have to. Like, people took a cost increase, and even customer sentiment wasn't that bad because we were all in it. Well, now tariffs very similar, but kind of controlling that, with perspective to wholesale customers, things like that. Hey, we're affected. Naturally, you, the manager, you have to protect the margin of that department. So things do have to be increased where applicable. So, but be smart about it, be diligent, and be accurate. So.
Well, just a quick question to everybody, and you can post it in the chat or whatever. Have any of you been affected whatsoever by any tariffs at this particular point? I'd really be curious to, just a quick note in the chat would help. We just haven't experienced it that much at this particular point. So thank you. Thank you, Kelsey. One of the things, being in supply chain management and having gone through this before, and Matthew, I'll get to you in just a second, is when you think in supply chain with our manufacturers, they usually have 120 to 180 days in the supply chain, in the pipeline already. So some of these tariffs, one of the things you have to remember, and this is a great point, and I never really realized it until I sat down in some manufacturer meetings, is that, us selling OE parts after the sale is really only about 4% of the entire parts market. The other 96% is the supply chain into building cars. And so that's something to think about, that we're just a very minor part, where we may see these increases more and more up front is going to be in building the new vehicles and the cost of a new vehicle, and the parts will come later. So anyway, Matthew, you had a question. Let's unmute you here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. Thanks for taking my question. Longtime fan of Dealer's Edge. I've actually left the automotive industry, but I'm a parts inventory control manager for a heavy equipment dealership. And we are facing that right now. We are a primary dealer for Caterpillar, but we have literally hundreds of vendors that we deal with for other equipment, for rental, telehandlers, lifts, things like that, generators. Some of the vendors that we've been dealing with are actually not just increasing the price of the part, which would be easy because you could work on a matrix and cover that, right? But they're actually charging line items for tariffs on their invoices. So
really,
yeah, there's some, and they're all different. Let me tell you, coming from the car industry into this industry is very, very different. The way that the vendors do their invoicing and just the way parts are sourced. But parts are parts. And at the end of the day, we want to maintain gross profit. But yeah, we've seen some vendors where some parts have a line item tariff charge, some don't. So working on a price matrix, you might even have to just increase those sources of supply, which we have, at a different margin, just to cover for the fact that it's going to be hit a direct expense on the way you account for it, because it's not just the price the inventory goes up. It's you're going to have to actually account for it as a line item, like a freight charge almost. So I don't know if other people have seen that or not, but I think Chris Palomo put that in the chat that he saw, different charges in different manners. I'm not sure if he's seen the same thing or not, but that's something to consider, because you're going to take a direct expense depending on how you account for that. And, you want to actually, make up for that when you sell it. Now, a lot of these items were ordering direct for a special order for a customer, so we could actually, put a line charge on there as well on the invoice to the customer. But when it comes to stock parts, what do, right? You're just going to take that direct expense right up front, and then, have to figure out what are you going to do to make up for it. And is it just tweak your matrix to hold a higher margin to offset it? But there's really no good math there, right? Like it's random.
Right.
So
yeah, and that, Matthew, that's where exactly by going into the matrix and maybe tweaking it a couple of percent. We went through this when, the high fuel charges, if you remember, gosh, 15 years ago, whatever it was, and we had a dealer group, they were charging a fuel surcharge, delivering to their wholesale customers, and they went nuts. And we said, why don't you just lower your discount 1 or 2% from list minus 20 to list minus 18? And they did that, and they said, wow, that worked great. And on the opposite side, going retail, Matthew, you bring up a great point on where this would be important, is if you see that tariff charge that they have down below, more than likely, you put that, to, like you said, a freight charge, but look at that percentage and increase each escalator category 3% or 2% to maintain that gross. Excellent point. And wow, I never thought that they had actually, show it as a separate line item. Very interesting.
Yeah,
Thanks for that insight, man.
Yeah, not a problem. I'm sure some of the dealers here that maybe work with body shops or different vendors, aftermarket parts, right? Like OEM vendors, they're typically going to increase their just pricing, right? But maybe aftermarket vendors for aftermarket vendors that come from Chinese or something like China or something like that, they might put a line charge on there, so it's something to be aware of. I don't know if insurance companies cover that kind of stuff, but we've seen it.
Sure, they will, Matthew. The insurance companies are probably more afraid of these tariffs and the price increases than anybody else. So good, very good points, and excellent to hear that kind of a perspective, and that they would actually. Any of the domestic dealers out here that are listening, have you seen any type of surcharge like Matthew's talking about? Typically, Matthew, as you know, in the car dealer end, they typically just jack the price up. I think Chrysler, their 3% increase was very premature based on timing and supply chain and so forth. So, and this is a great excuse for the manufacturers just to raise their prices. Sure. Hey, we got potential tariffs, so we're going to raise it. So great points and good perspective, Matthew. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Okay.
Did you guys see the question from Dennis?
Yeah, he was asking, can we basically, he's with Toyota, is there a way to explicitly find out what country of origin, certain parts are coming from?
At this particular point, it's not. I think, Japan is probably one of the trade partners with the United States that, even a bunch of the domestic dealers that I've talked with, they were kind of going, well, this doesn't matter to us. This is Europe and whatnot. Well, 40% of the parts on domestic vehicles come from Mexico and Canada. So, you've seen some of the Canadian things that have been affected and some Mexican tariffs, but things seem to be quieting down. It's kind of like the administration took a ready, shoot, aim approach, and now it's coming back down to reality. But we're certainly going to see some increases. And again, from my perspective, I really see this being making sure if you're using family or grid pricing, that you're really watching that depreciation report, because that's what will quickly add up and make those grosses go down. In fact, Joseph, you had a great point there. Wouldn't it be great to see a country of origin list and what the tariffs are at this particular point? So, and Eric, you're absolutely right. The first thing we did was we went in and looked at all our Ford, GM, Chrysler, our imports, and looked at the depreciation report. And except for Chrysler, it was nominal. Yeah. Thinking about their supply chain and where they're going, probably somewhere around maybe June, probably July is where most of us are going to see some increase in that appreciation. So there you go. Great stuff. Thanks for getting in there, Matthew. Thanks for asking that question and giving us that perspective. I love hearing from you guys. We learn from you as much. And Kaylee, did the article hit the automotive news today?
Should be either today or tomorrow. I don't think I saw anything, but we do have something going out in automotive news.
Yeah, the automotive news, we cover the tariffs perspective, and a lot of it you just heard today. But so, it is at the front and the foremost question that a lot of managers are asking, and being proactive about that, watching your appreciation and make sure you maintain your margins is the most important thing you could do over the next several months.
Blake, do you want to?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there you go.
Yep, we were thinking the same thing, weren't we?
Yes.
No, as we round it out, appreciate y'all being here. Yes, next month, our next webinar topic, something we face a lot, obviously, even just us as a company, but going through a DMS transition, a migration. The amount of brain damage, if you've ever gone through it, we all know what it's like. But we kind of feel we have a unique perspective on our side because we experience it kind of at such scale. We go through it, I don't know, Chuck, almost weekly at this point, if not, multiple times a month.
And this is from direct experience, having a dealer go from CDK to Techion or from, Reynolds to CDK. I don't care what you go from A to B or B to A. One of the things we've seen is some of the transitions, making sure you get with your DMS vendor that you're currently on to make sure that, and getting with the new DMS vendor, that they're pulling all the critical information. One of the things we always see is it seems like they never bring over months no receipt. And you literally have to beat these vendors into oblivion to make sure that you're getting all your historical data and things like last receipt. Those are some things we can help you understand if you're preparing to migrate and things like that. We thought it'd be a good time to have that kind of discussion. If you're thinking about a new DMS or you just went to one, this would be the webinar for you next month. Blake?
Absolutely. We won't pick on them too much. It won't be about that, but we'll definitely give our genuine perspective as to what we've faced. And I'm sure, Chuck, even if we weed in, some of the, I don't want to say opinions on the DMSs, but maybe cover that in a broad realm.
Well, and I think another thing we'd like to cover in this, Blake, and I'll certainly work on having a slide or two for you folks. So one of the things is the support by your DMS vendor. We have seen a couple of DMS vendors lately that their support has just gone south. And we can help you with understanding, as Blake says, go through the weeds of, what do you do when you get on a new DMS and then you can't get the support of the training for it. So I have a feeling with those of you listening, that's probably a pretty big deal. And, and Matthew, thanks. Matthew did see it, Kaylee. So it did hit the automotive news, the article.
I just purchased it.
Yeah, listening to Matthew's perspective, coming from that Caterpillar and that heavy duty truck end of it, we really appreciate that kind of perspective. And Matthew, just so you know, we just took on a series of Kubota stores and a whole new DMS and stuff like that. And we're getting the same education I think you got as well. So anyway.
Oh, wow. What DMS are they using? Is there like...
It's called HBS,
Okay.
If you've ever heard of it. So
I've not. I'll tell you, I came into this industry actually part of a DMS changeover. We went from an old AS400 system to Dynamics 365 based ERP system that is a whole nother world. It's awesome for inventory reconciliation, but man, is it complex. And it was a couple-year project, and I was a trainer for our company for the DMS change. So I might join that June 12th webinar to offer some insight on that, because there's a lot of pain still. Even a couple years later, we're uncovering things that are, wish we knew then, So.
Well, it's kind of like Matthew, and folks, if this starts to bore you, that's okay. But HBS It's basically a Microsoft Azure platform, which is a lot like what Techion is, which isn't bad. And actually, and Blake's been doing a lot of the research on HPS. We've been able to navigate it pretty well. It's not a bad system at all. It's new. And never even hearing about it in the automotive industry, we're kind of like, wow, okay. But a lot of the things, are just a little bit different. And like you said, and this is a great point, a lot more vendors that supply you instead of just, oh, we got Chrysler and we buy a little aftermarket. You get into Caterpillar or a heavy duty truck, next thing you know, you got 12 vendors, so.
Yeah.
Totally different experience, to say the least. So anyway, I'll look forward to maybe, if you join us next month, hearing some of your perspectives as we go through, going through DMS, transition.
Certainly, yeah. I'm still kind of connected to the industry's the industry, parts are parts. So I still kind of, my blood is in Toyota and CDK for many years. So still interested to, stay connected with what's going on. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Matthew. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Went a little longer than we thought, Blake.
Yeah, a little bit. We'll finish off with this. Next week, you can join Chuck at Dealer's Edge. He's going to present on reconciliations. Very key topic, especially in the beginning of the year, making sure that's done right, what to look at, to mitigate that part of the parts department. And I won't make a lot.
Make sure, Blake. I want to make sure those of you, if you go back, Blake, to this Dealer's Edge, if those of you that were in the parts reconciliation 2 months ago when I did that presentation, this is the exact same presentation. So if you want to hear it for a second time, that's great. But it's really a deja vu. It's just doing it for the Dealer's Edge people. If you listen to it a couple of months ago, it's the same thing that we're going to cover. If you missed it, it'll be great to have you online. There you go, Blake.
Yep, and a QR code there to sign up. And then really the last slide, dig into our white papers, a lot of industry topics we make available there, reducing obsolescence, key things like we discussed briefly today with inventory obsolescence. And then in the bottom left there, webinar recordings. As I mentioned, if you really want to deep dive into even pricing, many different tactics and approaches with just that topic, particularly matrix, multiple examples and different DMSs, things like that. Chuck does have a prior webinar that he did on just pricing. So feel free to scan that QR code and jump there. And then last but not least, our podcast, him and Kaylee do a great job about releasing relevant topics, interviews, just things going on in this industry. So that's our QR code to that. But with that, thanks for joining us. We always appreciate your time. Hopefully we provided some significant value for you. And even a topic like this, start a discussion and really share some understanding what's going on in our industry. So thank you for your time. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Take care. Okay.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.